What would Michael do? He would keep reading with a healthy dose of skepticism to find out if there is a case to be made for believing Jesus is uniquely divine. I'd say we're all divine, so it's no big deal. But anyways, we're still on chapter 6, are the Gospels biographies? And he just said, surely these writings, these Gospels, if they go back to the early apostles and their followers, then they must give us reliable accounts of Jesus' words and actions, right? Not necessarily. Although we've explored the historical origins of the Gospels, we still have to look at the literary genre of the Gospels. In a nutshell, when we're looking at a genre, we are asking the question, what kind of book is this? Is it history? Is it biography? Is it fictional, like a novel? Is it myth? The reason genre is important is that if you get the genre wrong, then you will misinterpret the writing. Think about it. If you walk into a library looking for a history of World War II, but accidentally pick up a misheveled novel from the fiction section, then you're going to seriously miss the author's point. The very reason libraries everywhere organize their collections according to the various kinds of books is because genre matters. That's also why the Bible is arranged according to genres: law, history, prophecy, wisdom, literature, gospels, acts, letters, and so on. Authors often provide clues to the genre of the work. The form, contents, length, tone, and so on all work together to help the reader to identify the kind of book it is. If a story begins with the words, "Once upon a time," then you know that what you're about to read is a fairy tale, not a history. I guess. You could start a historical tome with "Once upon a time." Okay, getting the genre right when we are evaluating the four Gospels as historical sources of knowledge about Jesus is important because some scholars today claim that the Gospels are much more like folklore than biography or history. One recent scholar claims that the authors of the Gospels were often not even trying to give their readers biographical information about what Jesus really said and did. And again, why would it matter? Is this true? Are the Gospels a form of folklore? Or are they ancient biographies? What literary clues do they contain that might help us determine their genre? In order to answer these questions, let's start by looking briefly at the modern theory that the Gospels are not biographies. So real quick, let's go back. He mentioned if you were going to look up a World War II history book, how would you know if it's accurate or not? And that's a really hard problem. Even just 80 years ago, all the histories about World War II are written with biases. They contain misinformation, disinformation, whatever the latest term for it is. And you really can't trust even a World War II biography that's tried as hard as they could to get the facts right. There's probably still lies or mistruths in there. So again, if it started talking about magic, let's say we're looking up a World War II history book and it starts talking about, I don't know, tanks just flying, or I don't know, people coming back from the dead, you might have a few questions about whether or not it's accurate. So, the Gospels as folklore. For the first 1800 years or so of their existence, the four Gospels were read as if they were biographies, accounts of the life of Jesus, telling us what he really did and what he really said. I would argue for the first 1800 years or so, they weren't read. The vast majority of people who believe Christianity for those 1800 years could not read, so they heard it secondhand, third hand, fourth hand, fifth hand from other people. Anyways. For example, in the 2nd century AD, Justin Martyr refers to the Gospels as the memoirs of the apostles and interprets them as having recorded what Jesus actually said and did. By referring to the Gospels as memoirs, Justin is using language from the biographical tradition in the Hellenistic, meaning Greek, world, and thus giving us a clue as to how the Gospels were read by ancient readers. Along similar lines, Augustine of Hippo described the four Gospels as trustworthy testimonies. Hey, I wonder if some of his power and authority came from making people believe that. Based on the remembrance of the disciples, of the words heard from his lips, and the deeds wrought by him beneath their eyes. Now, it is interesting. A lot of people want that to be the case. They want this to be accurate. They want it to be true. Which is a terrible way to go into an investigation. You don't want to go in hoping Jesus was a magician who came down from heaven and could do cool tricks. You want to go in just unbiased, uncaring about the results that you will discover. And keep in mind, the more bold a claim is, like if you're claiming something that you've never seen personally ever happen, and you're reading a book and it says this thing happened, it needs a little bit more evidence than something that you have seen happen. So like, for instance, somebody walking down a road or up a mountain, that's normal. It's not that hard to believe that somebody 2,000 years ago walked down a road or climbed a mountain. But when you start talking about curing diseases with mud and bringing people back from the dead and walking on water and turning one fish into 1,000 fish, that needs a little bit more evidence. So, not sure, even 4 books from eyewitnesses isn't really enough to believe in magic. Okay, in light of such examples, New Testament scholar Graham Stanton concludes, there is little doubt that early Christian readers of the Gospels did read them as biographies. Again, just because old dumb people believe something doesn't mean it's true. Fast forward almost 1,500 years and a dramatic shift takes place. In the late 19th century and early 20th century, some scholars began insisting that the Gospels were not biographies. Well, okay, yeah. Perhaps the most influential proponent of this idea was the German scholar Rudolf Bultmann, who wrote, "Must we look around for analogies to the explanation of the form of the Gospels? What analogies can be suggested? There are none in the Greek tradition, for there is no point in considering either the memoirs which Justin might have been thinking with his reference to blah 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 Hellenistic biography. There is no historical biographical interest in the Gospels, and that is why they have nothing to say about Jesus' human personality, his appearance and character, his origin, education, and development." Notice that Bultmann knows full well that Justin Martyr described the Gospels as biographical memoirs, yet he simply brushes this evidence aside and asserts that there is no historical biographical interest in the Gospels because they don't tell us what Jesus looked like. Again, this is straw manning. So he picked one guy who criticized it and then acts like that's a reason to not be skeptical. He appears to be saying that because the Gospels are not like modern biographies, which focus on exact details like appearance, psychological development, and education, they are not biographies at all. Instead, for Bultmann, the Gospels are more like folk tales and fairy stories. Even if they're biographies. If you read George Washington's biography, you should not believe all the words in there. People make shit up. They try to sell books.